now. Uh, New coach destinations around the league here. A bunch of hires that have happened over this past week and a little bit into last week there. Um, I'll start off first with Ime Udoka going to Houston. There's been a lot of rumblings in Houston all around, especially with Steven Silas being let go um, this past season. The failure to reach the younger guys there in the locker room kind of broke him, and that kind of story broke out there. But Houston's owner, I can't remember, Tim Fatila, I believe his name is, really wants this team to compete. And it's interesting because he traded James Harden for a bunch of draft picks, didn't really get anything, didn't get Jared Allen and all this other stuff. So to hear him say, hey, I want this team to compete, I want to be in the playoffs, et cetera, maybe because that playoff money. Maybe that's what it is. But in general, he wants this team to compete now. There's rumblings that they're going to go after James Harden, whatever the case may be. Ime Udoka is the head coach, and Ime Udoka's fallen out in Boston. Still doesn't sit right with a lot of people. There's the situation of potential, I don't even know what to call it, but that situation out there that he can't even speak on still. Is interesting because we saw the turnaround with Boston last year. We saw the initiative that he took in the media and with players. And with the owner saying, hey, I want to compete, I think he found the right guy here. Ime Udoka has that ability to reach the younger guys like he did in Brooklyn, like he did in Philly, like he did with Team USA, like he did with the Boston Celtics, with the Jays last year, with Marcus Smart, all those guys there. So there's at least a proven track record, at least of sustained consistency, right? Like he can do it on different types of levels as a development coach, as a defensive coach, as a head coach. He did get to the NBA Finals. He did have that turnaround last season. There's reports that a lot of the Boston assistants are going to leave the Celtics and go to Houston, which makes sense because those are his guys. That's his staff. There's a familiarity there, and they can actually build this from the ground up. It looks like Houston's going to give these guys full reign to have control over the not GM roles or anything like that, but do it their way. So Ime Udoka going to Houston, not surprised by that. I think that's a really good hire for Houston. I think that was one of the things there that they were missing, right? Even though Steven Silas, I think, is a good coach. I believe he's a good coach and should get another opportunity somewhere. Long-time assistant, but Ime Udoka has been a long-time assistant. So to sit there and see this come full circle, him being in Houston and in Texas again, but to be in Houston, that's good signs for the Rockets and they step in at least in the right direction to at least have that guy hold those young guys accountable and try to get most of them out of them on the defensive end, especially with Jabari Smith Jr. I think that's a very good pairing there, and I think he can tap to him and say, "Hey, I want you to be the guy here for this team." And we'll see how that rubs off if they're not going to trade the younger guys like Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green. Can he at least right the ship and try to get those guys heading in the right direction? So good job for the Houston Rockets hiring Ime Udoka. I think it's a good hire, and I think he should be in the league. So there's that. Moving on to the Milwaukee Bucks, who hired Adrian Griffin, who was an assistant coach in Toronto for the past couple of years. I believe he was on the championship team there. I just remember him from being a role player in Dallas. I remember those Dirk Nowitzki years, early 2000s after Nash left, and Adrian Griffin being on that team. I just remember him being on that team in Dallas and being a front court guy next to Dirk Nowitzki and Sean Bradley and those guys. So he's been an assistant for a long time. Shortly after he retired, I believe he went to Milwaukee. He was there with Scott Skiles. I believe he had a couple other stops there. But ended up in Toronto, ended up helping Nick Nurse with that development of that team and continuing the development of a lot of guys there. Seems to have a good pulse on the team there in Toronto and was a driving factor for their success with Nick Nurse. Milwaukee brought in finalists were Nick Nurse, Kenny Atkinson, and Adrian Griffin. And they brought in Giannis to eventually make the decision, ask these guys some questions. And I like that move from the Milwaukee Bucks, who look like it's going to be a little uncertainty potentially with Giannis's contract coming up, right? So to sit there and bring him in and say, hey, which out of these guys that you like, we're asking you, we're leaning on you, the franchise guy. I do like that from the Milwaukee Bucks, and I think that's at least a good sign in the right direction that Giannis actually picked this coach. And was there with Woj said he was there with notebooks, playbooks, asking questions, And apparently this is going to be a little bit more attention on the defensive end, right? And I think that's the thing that Giannis is really looking for, because we all saw there where he was like, yo, I listened to the coach. The coach is the one that makes adjustments and decisions and such of that nature with Mike Budenholzer. Mike Budenholzer really didn't make adjustments there, and I think that was the struggling point even in the season that they won the championship. So to sit there and see Giannis go with a guy that's a defensively, Kenny Atkinson, kind of a little bit more of an offensive guy development. Nick Nurse, definitely an offensive guy, guru who can do X's and O's. For Giannis to pick the defensive guy and say, hey, we need to get better on the defensive end. And maybe it was just defensive adjustments that they needed to make that could have had their postseason run a little different. And obviously the injury affected that as well. But if you can see the defensive side of the ball and have Giannis take another level and the Milwaukee Bucks on that side of the ball, the offense is going to find its way. I think the NBA is going to be good enough. I think they have enough good enough guys, Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton, Giannis himself included, and Brook Lopez. I think they have the right personnel. They have the right system to have a good offense. So for him to say, hey, let's go with the defensive guy, I think that's very important. So that's good for the Milwaukee Bucks as well. Another good hire. Moving down the road just a little bit, we're going to go to Philadelphia, where they have hired Nick Nurse. Nick Nurse, for whatever reason in Toronto, just fell out. The time was just coming to a head there where he was butting with Pascal Siakam a little bit, I believe 2 years ago. And things just rubbing everybody the wrong way, where I don't think the team was as good. And I think that was clear since Kawhi Leonard left, right? But they did have some pieces there. He got the most out of OG Anunoby, I believe. Fred VanVleet became a good player. So it's just like, I feel like this was a franchise that was in the middle of the road and kind of grinding the gears, and kind of Nick Nurse kind of knew he was on his way out for a while. That was all the story was up there in Toronto during the season, was that he was on his way out. So he ends up going to Philly, ironically. Him and Joel Embiid had a little back and forth there, where they're both saying, hey, yo, you bitch for calls. And there was a game where Joel Embiid said, hey, yo, all he's doing is bitching for calls in the post game. And now they're together, and they both will be bitching for calls together for the Philadelphia 76ers. So it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. I believe Nick Nurse is a better coach offensively than Doc Rivers, even though Doc Rivers' emphasis all year was the pick and roll between James Harden and Joel Embiid. That's one of the main points where you hear the before the season in training camp, when they have them mic'd up, he was like, yo, we're going to be unstoppable in this pick and roll. James Harden and Joel Embiid. And that was just simple from a standpoint that you would put your two best players in the pick and roll. Doc Rivers tried to emphasize that a lot more. I think Nick Nurse can bring a different level of offensive game planning a little bit there to get other guys a little bit more involved. He's not afraid to play the bench, which Doc Rivers at times was. He's going to put guys in the best position. I believe Nick Nurse is going to do that and put guys in different situations where they can succeed. I think Tyrese Maxey is going to be the benefactor of that. Probably get Tobias Harris a little bit more juiced, a little bit more going, get these other guys there, get more shooters involved, get a little bit more stability there offensively, where we saw it kind of break down at times for Philadelphia. But it's going to be a question, of course, of Joel Embiid's health. Of course, if James Harden is going to resign. That is the biggest thing. If they lose James Harden for nothing, or James Harden decides to do a sign and trade, or whatever they get back, they have to get accountable pieces. And of course, Darren Morey has a plan. He's one of the better GMs in the league to try to figure out and piece together something behind Joel Embiid. And I'm pretty sure he's going to try to do that, especially after getting the MVP for Joel Embiid there last year in Philadelphia. The campaign that they were on, I'm pretty sure they're going to try to put as many resources behind Joel Embiid to make sure this is a successful run and try to get back to a championship. And I think hiring Nick Nurse, they have at least tried to answer that calling, especially departing from Doc Rivers and the 3-2 lead that they've blown into the playoffs just now against the Celtics. So I think Nick Nurse is a good coach. I think that's another good hire from them. But I think the offensive end of the ball, where it's just not pick and roll, everyone stand in the corner, knock down some shots, I think there's going to be a little bit more dynamic offensively. And, of course, defensively, if you got Joel Embiid, you got P.J. Tucker, you're at least going to be okay on defense. So it's going to be interesting to see how that goes between those team franchises, especially with Nick Nurse and Joel Embiid, and seeing if he can get those guys to the next level. Of course, there was rumblings of Nick Nurse getting the Milwaukee job, getting the Phoenix job, but he has an MVP in Joel Embiid right there. And I think that he's going to tie himself to that and try to see if they can at least get over the hump for this Philadelphia 76ers. Moving on, Monty Williams to Detroit. I like the hire. That's the first thing I'm going to say. The salary. He becomes the highest paid coach in the NBA with his salary for Detroit. And I believe he rejected the first offer from Detroit. And I was just like, okay, I thought that was a good place for him to mentor a young team with Cade Cunningham, James Wiseman, who just was brought there, Killian Hayes, Isaiah Stewart, guys of that nature, Jalen Duran. So I'm just sitting there like, okay, well, why would he reject that? And Detroit basically came with the Godfather offer. Monty Williams is now the highest paid coach in the NBA. I'm not against that. I feel like for Detroit, for a franchise that has had no stability since probably 2008, that was Chauncey Billups, Joe Dumars in the front office. For them to have some stability, some good draft picks, and try to build it up like that, I think that's the right way to go. And to have Monty Williams come in and try to mentor these guys, get them in the right way, get them in the right position, be professional, get a different level of commitment and excellence from these guys. Not to say that they're not, but I feel like there's a coach there that at least they know, hey, this guy has a track record. He's going to try to put us in the best position. Even though the falling out with DeAndre Ayton happened in Phoenix, I think it's going to be a different situation in where the expectations aren't as high in terms of the success right away. But I feel like Monty Williams is going to be able to reach these guys a different way than he was to reach DeAndre Ayton in Phoenix. And at least have a franchise that's committed to him. I think with the Robert Sarver situation last year, with him being departing, even though James Jones was behind Monty Williams, Matt Ishbia, the new owner, probably wasn't. And you can tell by the days of not being able to repair that relationship with DeAndre Ayton, the inability to use the lack of a bench that he was given in Phoenix, I believe, after the KD trade. Excuse me. So to see that play out, I feel like there's at least a commitment there behind him. Whereas in Phoenix, it was kind of writing on the wall. We kind of knew he was on his way out. We knew that was going to happen. So to see a franchise commit to him and say, yo, we want you, right? Out of everybody, the other coach that we see there, we probably can't get, whatever the case may be, come to us. We want you. And to see that commitment from Detroit hopefully puts everything in the right direction. And hopefully Detroit's on the rise after this. And they have draft picks coming up. They have a lot of young guys and a lot of young talent. Hopefully Cade Cunningham is fully recovered. I feel like they shouldn't have traded Sadiq Bey. That's a whole different discussion. But regardless of this team right now, I think they're heading in the right direction. They have some building blocks there, getting a good coach, and I think they're heading in the right direction. Moving on to the surprise hire, to me at least. There was rumblings that Phoenix was going to hire Kevin Young, from Bill Simmons. Nick Nurse was looking at that job. Doc Rivers was looking at that job. And it looked like it came to Doc Rivers and Frank Vogel, who was the new coach of the Phoenix Suns, which is the biggest surprise to me because I didn't even know he was in the running. I didn't hear his name. I didn't see it. So to see him get hired, I believe it's $31 million over 5 years. It's an interesting hire because I don't think he fits that dynamic of the Phoenix Suns, where they have given up their depth defensively with Cam Johnson and Mikal Bridges gone, and now bringing a defensive coach to address their defensive side of the ball without much resources. I'm like, Frank Vogel is known for his defense in Indiana, Orlando, and in LA. The one thing he was known for was his defense. So to see this offensive power team hired a defensive coach with not much resources, not much depth, it's going to get interesting to see how this plays out. But I do think Frank Vogel is a good coach. And one thing that he's going to be able to do is try to patchwork a defense. And maybe that's all Matt Ishbia is looking for, right? Maybe James Jones, maybe that's all they're looking for, is a coach to come in and kind of just patch enough a defense to just get a couple stops, right? Because Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, offensive guys, they're probably going to score 80 a night between the both of them. So to have that type of production and continuation, they probably just need to address the defensive side of the ball, right? So it's going to get interesting to see how that goes. And I thought it was a shock of a hire, especially hearing Frank Vogel visiting the Celtics last year. I thought he was going to join as an assistant. But as I told some people, I'm like, yo, if a head coaching job comes up, it's in Phoenix, Arizona. You got Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. You have a chance to run your own ship. You're going to take that job regardless. So to see that pan out there, and I think it's going to be a weird hire, but I think he's going to be able to work his way through it. Frank Vogel's been a battler. He's not going to be afraid to address guys and put them in the right spots, especially defensively, and hold them accountable, especially on that end, which I think Phoenix needs to be held accountable on that end. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do roster-wise with Chris Paul. It's going to be interesting to see if DeAndre Ayton's still on the team, which I do not think he will be. So we'll see how that goes for Phoenix. Toronto was the last coaching vacancy there. I believe they're talking to Sergio Scarmall. I believe. I can't remember his last name, but he's an international coach. A lot of international experience. He's been on the assistant with them. Is Mike Budenholzer going to be there? I'm pretty sure Doc Rivers isn't going to want to take that job. So I think those guys are out. Are there potential vacancies that could open up during the course of the year? Probably, that those guys can enter in and see a good situation. So it's interesting to see Doc Rivers and Mike Budenholzer, two guys who are prominent coaches in the league, now out of it. So, and especially with Toronto, it doesn't look like anyone's going to take that job between those guys. So it's going to be interesting to see where those guys. It's going to be interesting to see who does take that Toronto gig. So we should see what happens there with those coaching.